Next for us here this evening on the Town Hall, the industrial history of Niagara Falls has caused plenty of health issues there. Love Canal, of course, the most prominent, but it is not alone. And a national article is now highlighting a chemical plant for the serious impact that it's having on its workers. It comes from reporters at NPR and Pro Publica, a national nonprofit focused on investigative journalism. And you can see there the headline reads, "The U.S. never banned asbestos. These workers are paying the price." The reporter spoke with more than a dozen former workers at the chem plant in Niagara Falls, detailing the health issues they faced because of asbestos exposure at the plant that closed just a year ago. Joining us live right now is Bedi, a Washington, D.C. reporter for Pro Publica and one of the people behind this article. We really appreciate you coming on. It is very in-depth. It's very thorough. I know you spent a lot of time working on this. Can you explain to our viewers what you found in talking with those chem workers?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So we spoke to more than a dozen former workers at the Oxy plant in Niagara Falls, and they remembered for decades dirty, dangerous conditions related to asbestos. They said that asbestos dust had hung in the air, that it had accumulated on the lights and the beams, that it was inches deep in some places. They also said they wore protective gear for some tasks, but they walked in and out of this building throughout the day without special suits or face masks. One guy we write about always seemed to have some stuck to his mustache. Another guy remembers climbing up to the roof of this building and even seeing asbestos piled up there, and it was free to float away from the plant.
In the headline that we just read for your article, you make a point of mentioning that the U.S. has not banned asbestos. And seeing what happened here, and I imagine there are situations like this in other places, what did you learn about the history of why that hasn't happened?
That's a great question, and something we wanted to understand as well. Coming into this, I didn't realize the U.S. hadn't banned asbestos, and I think many Americans would be surprised to learn the government hasn't fully banned asbestos. What we learned was that in recent years, one of the main groups fighting against a ban was the chemical industry, or specifically the chlorine industry. They use asbestos in some older chlorine production plants, like the one in Niagara Falls, and they don't want to be forced to upgrade that technology. So for years, they've argued against a ban, saying it wasn't necessary and that their workers were well protected with the protocols at these plants. Lawmakers and public health advocates have questioned those claims in the past, but they hadn't actually been able to assess the conditions in these facilities.
So what happens next here? I mean, especially as people read this article and you know, there are harrowing parts to it. And you see what so many of these people have been through. What will happen next? Because it does look like there is a chance there could finally be some action.
It does seem like there is a chance for some action. In April this year, the Environmental Protection Agency finally proposed a new ban on asbestos, but the rule isn't finalized yet, and it may still take more than a year for that to happen. Meanwhile, the chlorine industry again is fighting really hard to stop that from happening. They've also got some real political heavyweights on their side, including a dozen Republican attorneys general who say a ban would be too much of a burden on industry. There are about 8 plants left in the US that still import and use asbestos. There's also a bill in Congress right now that would ban asbestos. Lawmakers and advocates say passing a law would maybe be faster than going through the EPA, and it would be harder to stop. But we're still watching to see if and how that moves forward.
Certainly encourage everyone to check out Pro Publica and see the reporting that you and others have done on this issue. This happening, right here in our community. Bedi reports on the federal government for Pro Publica. Thanks for coming on and helping us understand your reporting.
Thank you for having me.